Mateo understood his place better than you understand yours.
We're done.
When my daughter told me that I would not be welcome at her house for Christmas, I simply smiled, got in my car, and made one phone call. By the new year, I had their mortgage payments canceled, and that was just the beginning. Justice must be restored, and the arrogance of the ungrateful must be punished. You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I could make my famous roast lamb this year, I said, settling deeper into Sophia's plush leather couch. The one with the rosemary and garlic your father used to love. Remember how he'd always say it was better than his own mother's. The words hung in the warm air between us, a ghost of a happier time, mixing with the cloying scent of David's expensive vanilla candles. My daughter shifted beside me, her diamond wedding ring catching the light from their 12-foot Christmas tree. A monstrous, perfectly decorated thing that stood where their old piano used to be. Something in her posture changed, her shoulders pulling inward as if she were bracing for an impact she knew was coming. "Mom," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Unfortunately, you won't be welcome here for Christmas." The words hit me not like a blow, but like the sudden, shocking silence after a car crash. I blinked, certain I had misheard through the cheerful jingle of Christmas music playing softly from a hidden speaker. "What do you mean? Why wouldn't I be welcome?" Sophia couldn't meet my eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the Italian marble coffee table, the one I'd helped her pick out last spring after David decided their old furniture lacked sophistication. "David's parents are coming," she mumbled, "and they would prefer if you weren't here." My hands, resting on my lap, went cold. They would prefer. "It's just easier this way, Mom," she continued, her voice getting smaller with each word as if she were shrinking inside herself. "You know how his family is about their traditions. They have their own way of doing things." I looked around the living room, my eyes cataloging my own sacrifices. I saw the silk curtains I'd paid for when David complained about privacy from the neighbors. I saw the polished hardwood floors that had come from my second mortgage after Sophia lost her job. I saw the ornate crown molding that had maxed out my last credit card. Every inch of this house bore my fingerprints, my financial ruin, my desperate, foolish love for my only child. "Their own way," I repeated slowly, the words feeling foreign and heavy in my mouth. "And what way is that, Sophia?" She flinched. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Through the archway into the kitchen, I could see David's brand new espresso machine, a professional-grade monstrosity he'd insisted he needed for his home barista phase. $2,000 of my money, sitting there gleaming under the recessed lighting I'd also paid for. Where will I spend Christmas then? The question came out quieter than I intended, laced with a vulnerability I hated. Sophia's face crumbled. "Maybe you could visit Aunt Sophia, or we could do something the weekend after." The weekend after, as if Christmas were just another appointment that could be rescheduled for convenience. I stood up, my knees protesting after 8 years of carrying this family alone since my husband Mateo passed. "I see." "Mom's wait," she pleaded, but I was already moving toward the door. I walked past the gallery wall of family photos, noticing how my face seemed to grow smaller and more distant in each successive frame. My hand found the doorknob, solid and cold under my palm. "Daughter," I said without turning around, "tell David's parents I said Feliz Navidad." The December air hit my face like a slap as I walked toward my old SUV. Behind me, I heard Sophia call my name once, a weak, pleading sound quickly swallowed by the soft, final click of the door closing. The sound was absolute. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, engine off, watching the cheerful Christmas lights twinkle in the windows of the house I had bought but would never belong in. My phone buzzed, probably Sophia, wanting to smooth things over with empty promises and weaponized guilt. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned the key and drove into the darkness. The heater hummed a lonely tune against the December cold as I navigated the familiar streets. Every corner held a memory of the woman I used to be, the one who believed family was an unbreakable bond, who would have bled herself dry to see her daughter smile. That woman, I realized with a sudden, cold clarity, was a fool. At a red light, I watched a young mother load shopping bags into her car, her kids pressing their faces against the window, their breath fogging the glass with excitement. Once upon a time, that had been Sophia and me, before David, before I became nothing more than a walking ATM with inconvenient emotions. The numbers started rolling through my head like a broken slot machine. $3,000 every single month for 5 years. My calculator had given up trying to make sense of it last spring. $180,000. More money than my husband Matteo and I had saved for our entire retirement. Gone, poured into a fantasy I wasn't allowed to be a part of. I drove past Lincoln Park, the bare branches of the oak trees like skeletal fingers against the darkening sky. A wave of memory, so sharp it was almost a physical pain, washed over me. Matteo and I, walking this very path the year before he died. He stopped, his hand warm on my back, and looked at me with those serious, loving eyes. "Whatever happens to me, Anna," he'd said, his voice raspy from the chemo, "you make sure our girl is safe. You make sure she has everything." I had kept that promise. I had given her everything. I had given her the down payment on her house by refinancing our house. I remembered the loan officer, a kind young woman, looking at me with a pity I hadn't understood at the time. "Mrs. Flores," she'd said, "this is a big risk for someone else's asset." "It's my daughter's future," I had replied, so full of righteous maternal pride. The woman had just nodded sadly. I had given her the second mortgage when David lost his job 2 years ago. "Just temporary, Mom," Sophia had promised, "just until he gets back on my feet." David had stood behind her, his $800 watch gleaming on his wrist, nodding sympathetically while his eyes calculated exactly how much my desperation was worth. As it turned out, my desperation was worth nothing to them. I finally pulled into my own driveway, the one with the cracked concrete I couldn't afford to fix because every spare dollar had disappeared into their perfect suburban dream. The porch light flickered, another repair I'd been putting off. Inside, the house felt hollow, a museum of a life that was over, empty without Matteo's laughter, without the warmth of family gatherings that would never happen again. As I fumbled for my keys, my phone rang, the shrill tone echoing in the empty hall. David's name flashed on the screen, perfect timing. I'd been waiting 5 years for this conversation. I answered on the fourth ring, letting him wait just long enough to wonder if I'd pick up at all. "Anna," David's voice dripped with a false, practiced sweetness, the same tone he used when he needed me to co-sign a car loan or cover their property taxes. "I heard about the little misunderstanding with Sophia." "Misunderstanding?" I leaned against my kitchen counter, the cold of the granite seeping through my coat. "I don't think there's any misunderstanding, David. Your wife made her position quite clear." "Look, I know this seems harsh," he began, his voice taking on a condescendingly patient quality, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "But you have to understand my parents' perspective. They're very traditional people. They expect a certain atmosphere during the holidays." "A certain atmosphere," I repeated, my own voice flat and dead. "And what atmosphere is that?" There was a pause. I could hear the faint clinking of ice in a glass. He was probably pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter I'd bought them for their anniversary. "Well," he said, sighing as if burdened by my ignorance. "Frankly, Anna, they're educated people. They expect conversations about current events, literature, art, you know." The words hit harder than Sophia's had. This wasn't a weak apology, it was a justification. 8 years of biting my tongue, of swallowing insults for my daughter's sake, of pretending not to notice the way David looked at me like I was the hired help who had forgotten to use the back door. "And I can't contribute to that," I asked, my voice dangerously level. "What exactly would you contribute?" he asked, the false sweetness gone, replaced by undisguised snobbery. "Stories about sanding floors." Heat flooded my chest, a furnace of rage stoked by years of silent sacrifice. But I kept my voice steady. I took over Mateo's business after he died and turned it from a two-man operation into a company that employs 50 people. "I've paid more in taxes than your father has made in his best year." "Money isn't everything, Anna," he sneered. "Breeding matters, education matters. And frankly, Mateo understood his place better than you understand yours." The line went dead silent. He crossed it. A line I didn't even know existed until he had stomped across it in his Italian leather shoes. All the air left my lungs. The grief for my husband, a wound I thought had scarred over, was ripped open and salted. "What did you say about my husband?" I whispered, my voice a thing I didn't recognize. "I'm just saying he knew how to blend in better," David said, oblivious. "He was a simple man. He understood that some spaces just weren't meant for him." My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. My Mateo, who could name every star in the sky, who read history books for fun, who had more honor and integrity in his calloused little finger than David's entire bloodline would ever possess. A simple man. "David," I said, and my voice was no longer my own. It was something colder, harder. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. This conversation is over. We are done pretending to be a family. You can't just..." "We're done," I repeated, and I ended the call. I set the phone down carefully on the counter, my hands surprisingly steady. A strange calm washed over me. The pain was gone, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard resolve. The kitchen around me felt different, smaller, but somehow cleaner, as if a great weight had finally been lifted from the air itself. I walked to the small desk in the corner, the one piled high with bills I struggled to pay, and pulled out the manila folder I'd been avoiding for months. Bank statements, mortgage papers. 5 years of automatic transfers that had bled me dry while they lived like royalty. It was time to stop the bleeding. The documents spread across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene, a 5-year chronicle of my own martyrdom. Bank statements, each one a neat, printed record of the same automatic transfer, $3,000 on the 15th of every month, vanishing from my account into theirs. It was a paper trail of my own stupidity. I pulled out an old calculator from a drawer, its buttons worn smooth from years of use, and started adding. The first year, $36,000. I remembered that year I had to postpone a much-needed dental crown. The second year, another $36,000. That was the year I stopped buying myself new clothes, patching up old sweaters instead. By the third year, I had started shopping at discount grocery stores, my cart filled with store brands instead of the fresh produce Mateo, and I had always loved. This year, the fifth year, there had been weeks where I'd eaten canned soup for dinner just to make sure the transfer would go through. $180,000, and that was just the baseline. It didn't count the down payment, a $50,000 chunk taken directly from my home equity. It didn't count the times I'd covered their utilities when David's investment opportunities went south. It didn't count the $20,000 kitchen renovation, the new roof, the landscaping, the endless stream of furniture and appliances that were essential for their lifestyle. I sat back in my chair, looking at the numbers until they blurred. Mateo's life insurance money, my retirement savings, the college fund we'd started for the grandchildren I would apparently never be allowed to see. All of it gone, poured into a house where I wasn't welcome for Christmas dinner, a house where my husband's memory was casually dismissed. I reached for my phone, my movements slow and deliberate, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my bank. The automated system offered me options in English and Spanish. How thoughtful, how accommodating to people like me. Customer service, I said into the phone. This is Jennifer. How can I help you today? Her voice was young, cheerful. I took a deep breath. I need to cancel an automatic monthly transfer, I said, my voice steadier than it had been in years. Certainly, ma'am. I'll just need your account number and some verification information. I rattled off the numbers, listening to the quiet click of her keyboard in the background. She was professional, efficient, offering no judgment about why a 62-year-old woman was canceling a payment that was likely for her own child's mortgage. Okay, Mrs. Flores, I see the transfer you're referring to. $3,000 monthly to Wells Fargo, account ending in 7423. How long have you been making this transfer? 5 years, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. And you want to cancel it, effective immediately. I looked around my kitchen, at the outdated appliances I couldn't afford to replace, at the walls that desperately needed painting, at the windows that leaked cold air because I had spent my home improvement money on someone else's castle. Effective immediately, I confirmed. There was a final flurry of clicks. Done, she said, her voice still bright. The transfer has been canceled. Is there anything else I can help you with today? No, I said, surprising myself with how good the word felt on my tongue. No, that's everything. I hung up and sat in the sudden, profound quiet of my house. The bleeding had stopped. The first step was complete. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, December sunlight streaming through my kitchen windows as I nursed my second cup of coffee. It was a good Colombian blend, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to buy in years. For the first time, I wasn't mentally calculating how much money would disappear from my account in a few days. The freedom tasted better than the coffee. My phone rang at exactly 10:47. David's name flashed on the screen like a warning label. Anna, his voice was clipped, devoid of any of the false sweetness from the night before. It was the tone of a man used to giving orders. I trust you've had time to cool off. I need you to pick up my parents from the airport. Their flight from Portland arrives at 2. I set down my mug carefully, watching the steam curl toward the ceiling. The audacity was breathtaking. David, I said, my voice a placid lake, did you forget about our conversation yesterday? Look, he sighed, the sound a gust of pure impatience. Whatever little drama that was about, we need to focus on practical matters now. My parents need transportation, and let's be honest, you're the only one with nothing but time on your hands. Sophia is busy, and I have meetings. There it was, the casual, cutting dismissal of my life as empty and unimportant. He saw me not as a person, but as a resource to be deployed, and you're asking me because. Because that's what family does, Anna, he said, his voice sharpening with irritation. They help each other. Besides, my sedan is in the shop, and I can't have them taking some grubby taxi. Your old SUV might not be pretty, but it's big enough for their luggage, so just get in your car and pick them up. It wasn't a request, it was a command wrapped in a series of insults. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. The woman from yesterday would have. The woman today had a better plan. What airline? I asked quietly. Alaska Air Flight 447, he rattled off, relieved at my quick capitulation. They'll be at baggage claim Carousel 3, and Anna, he added, his voice dripping with condescension, they're expecting someone who can handle their luggage properly. Don't embarrass us. I could hear the faint tap-tap-tap of his fingers on a keyboard, probably closing a deal with money he didn't have. Of course, I said, I'll take care of everything. Good, he said briskly, and wear something decent. Maybe that blue blouse you wore to Sophia's graduation. They notice things like that. The line went dead. He hadn't even said thank you. I sat back in my chair, looking at my phone's blank screen. 2:00, flight 447, baggage claim, Carousel 3. I glanced at the wall clock above my sink. 10:52, plenty of time. I poured myself another cup of coffee, added an extra spoonful of sugar, and opened yesterday's newspaper to the crossword puzzle I hadn't finished. 7 across, delayed gratification, 12 letters. The answer I knew would come to me eventually. At 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes after their flight was scheduled to land, I was settling into my favorite armchair with a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea and the Sunday edition of the local paper. The crossword puzzle from yesterday lay completed on my coffee table. The answer to 7 across, delayed gratification, had finally come to me, postponement. My phone buzzed against the wooden surface, Sophia's name flashing on the screen. I let it ring, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into the quiet peace of my afternoon. The December sun slanted through my living room windows, warming the space where I'd spent so many lonely evenings counting the cost of my generosity. Today, the silence felt different. It felt earned, intentional. At 2:47 p.m., the phone buzzed again. This time, I could see the preview of her text message lighting up the screen. "Mom, where are you? My parents are waiting." I turned the phone face down on the table and returned to the sports section. The Seahawks had lost again. Some things never change. By 3:30, my phone had buzzed 6 more times. I'd finished the newspaper, brewed a second pot of tea, and on a whim, started organizing the junk drawer in my kitchen. It was amazing what you could accomplish when you weren't rushing around serving people who considered you their personal bellhop. The seventh call came at 3:45. This time, instead of Sophia's name, it was an unknown number. Probably her parents, having borrowed a stranger's phone at the airport. I let that one ring, too. Outside, a neighbor was hanging Christmas lights on his porch, his children running around the yard with the manic energy that only a December afternoon could bring. Normal families doing normal things. No one was stranded anywhere, waiting for someone who would never come. At 4:15 p.m., the buzzing became constant, a frantic, angry tirade against my silence. Sophia, then the unknown number, then David, then Sophia again. It was like an angry wasp trapped against a pane of glass. I walked calmly to my kitchen and unplugged my landline from the wall. Then I picked up my cell phone, held down the power button, and watched the screen go black, perfect silence. I made myself a grilled cheese sandwich and heated up a can of tomato soup, the kind of simple comfort food I hadn't allowed myself in months because every grocery dollar had been stretched thin to subsidize their lifestyle. The cheese melted into a perfect golden crust. The soup steamed in my favorite mug, the one Mateo had given me 1 year for Mother's Day. Outside, the winter sun was already starting to set, casting long, dramatic shadows across my backyard. Somewhere across town, 3 entitled people were probably standing in a cold airport parking garage, arguing about taxi fares and wondering how their personal servant had the audacity to abandon them. The thought made my soup taste even better. By 5:00 p.m., I'd eaten dinner, loaded my dishwasher, and was considering what movie to watch. It had been years since I'd had an entire evening to myself without the low-grade anxiety of an emergency call for money or a last-minute demand for a favor. I was reaching for the remote when it started, a loud, aggressive pounding on my front door. Not a knock, a pounding. The kind of furious hammering that rattled the doorframe and announced pure, unadulterated rage. I set down my tea, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm, and walked slowly toward the sound, already knowing exactly who I would find on the other side. The pounding intensified as I approached the door, each blow more violent than the last, the aggressive hammering of people who have never been told no in their lives. Through the peephole, I could see 3 figures crowded on my small porch, their faces distorted by the fisheye lens, looking like wolves circling their prey. I took a deep, steadying breath, turned the deadbolt with a satisfying click, and opened the door. Robert Jenkins's red, furious face was inches from mine. "What in God's name is wrong with you?" he shouted, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. We waited at that goddamn airport for over 3 hours. Eleanor followed him, her usually perfect coiffure disheveled, her lips pressed into a thin, white line of pure hatred. "This is completely unacceptable behavior," she hissed. "Absolutely barbaric." David brought up the rear, his face a mask of indignation, his designer coat wrinkled. "You humiliated us, Anna. Do you have any idea what you've done? My parents had to take a $60 taxi because you decided to have a little tantrum." I let them finish their chorus of rage, standing silently by the open door, letting the cold December air wash over them. When they finally paused, breathless with their own fury, I spoke, my voice cutting through their noise like a blade through silk. "Get out of my house." They stopped, shocked into silence by the steel in my tone. Robert's face went from red to a dangerous shade of purple. "You don't get to make demands here, lady," he snarled. "Not after what you pulled today." "This is my house," I said quietly, not moving from my position, "and I want you out now." Alina stepped forward, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension she had perfected over decades of looking down on people like me. "Anna, you clearly don't understand the magnitude of your mistake. My husband has connections throughout this city, business connections, social connections. You cannot treat people like us this way and expect—" "This was a lesson for you," I interrupted, meeting her gaze steadily. "A lesson in humility, a lesson in what happens when you treat the people you depend on like dirt." David's mouth fell open. "A lesson? Who do you think you are to teach anyone anything? You're nobody." "I'm someone who finally stopped being your personal bank account and your family's taxi service," I replied. I stepped aside and held the door open wider. "The lesson is over. You can leave now." Robert jabbed a finger toward my chest, but didn't quite dare to touch me. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old woman," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I spent 30 years at the heart of this city's financial world. Reputations are fragile things, Anna. One phone call from me, and the loans for that little construction business of yours could be reviewed." It was a threat, cold and specific. Alina nodded, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Indeed, actions have consequences, Anna, and yours are about to become quite public." David grabbed his father's arm. "Dad, let's just go. She's not worth the oxygen." They filed out of my house like a defeated army, but Robert turned back at the threshold, his eyes promising retribution. "You'll regret this," he said. "I guarantee it." I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolts. Through the window, I watched them pile into their rental car, still arguing as they drove away into the darkness. The house felt cleaner with them gone, as if their presence had left a stain that was only now lifting. But their parting words echoed in the sudden quiet: "Public consequences, connections, you'll regret this." I walked back to my living room and picked up my tea, still warm in its mug. For the first time in this whole mess, I felt a flicker of concern. But it was quickly overwhelmed by something much stronger: anticipation. 3 days later, I was enjoying my morning coffee and scanning the local news on my tablet. The silence in my house was no longer hollow, it was a comfortable, earned peace. Just as I was about to start the crossword puzzle, my phone rang. It was my sister, Sophia, her voice tight with a concern that immediately put me on edge. "Anna, is everything okay? I just got a strange call from our cousin Maria. She said she heard some awful gossip about you." I felt a prickle of unease. "What kind of gossip, Sophia?" "Something about you abandoning some elderly people at the airport during a storm. It sounds ridiculous, of course, but she said people are talking." I assured her I was fine and hung up, the unease now a cold knot in my stomach. Public consequences, Robert's threat echoed in my mind. I walked to the end of my driveway and retrieved the morning paper from its plastic sleeve. And there it was, my own face, staring back at me from page 3 of the Spokane Review. The headline read, "Local businesswoman abandons elderly couple AT airport during holiday storm." My hands went still around the thin paper. It was an old photo from my company's website, at least 5 years out of date, making me look tired and severe. Below it was a story that made my blood run cold and my temper flare in equal measure. Robert and Alina Jenkins, visiting their daughter for Christmas, were left stranded at Spokane International Airport for over 4 hours Sunday when family member Ana Flores failed to appear for a prearranged pickup. The couple, both in their late 60s, waited in frigid temperatures as a winter storm warning was issued for the region. A winter storm warning, it had been 52 degrees and sunny. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs as I continued to read. We couldn't believe someone would just abandon us like that, the article quoted Robert Jenkins, identified as a retired and respected banking executive. We called repeatedly, but Mrs. Flores never answered her phone. We were forced to take an expensive taxi in dangerous weather conditions. At our age, this kind of treatment is not just inconsiderate, it's dangerous. The article went on, filled with anonymous quotes from concerned friends about my pattern of erratic behavior and worries about my mental state following the death of my husband. They had painted themselves as helpless victims of a cruel, unstable old woman who had snapped without provocation. There was no mention of the Christmas dinner rejection, no context about David's demands, no hint of the 5 years of financial exploitation. It was just me, the villain who abandoned poor, elderly tourists during a blizzard that had existed only in Robert's malicious imagination. I set the paper down on my kitchen table and read the article again, slowly, then a third time. The byline belonged to a Patricia Morrison, lifestyle editor. I didn't recognize the name, but I recognized the strategy. This wasn't just gossip, this was a calculated media hit. Robert had called in his favors, used his old banking connections to get this story placed exactly where it would do the maximum damage to my reputation in this small city. Smart, very smart. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt a grudging respect for my opponent. He wasn't just an arrogant fool throwing a tantrum, he was strategic. He understood that in a city like Spokane, reputation was currency, and he had just tried to bankrupt me. This was a declaration of war. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside, my mind already shifting into the methodical, cold planning mode that had helped me build my business from nothing. This wasn't about airport pickups anymore. This wasn't about Christmas dinner or mortgage payments. This was about winning. I spent the next 3 days living in a different world. Not the world where I was Ana Flores, the grieving widow and broken-down old woman who let her family walk all over her. This was the world where I was Ana Flores, the businesswoman, the strategist, the woman who had taken over her husband's failing construction company with 2 employees and a mountain of debt, and built it into one of the most respected firms in the region. The woman who knew how to fight. My laptop became my command central, my kitchen table the war room. Social media profiles filled my browser tabs like playing cards in a high-stakes game. Alina Jenkins's Instagram was a perfect curated fantasy of refined living. Charity luncheons at the Spokane Club, wine tastings in Walla Walla, vacation photos from a luxury resort in Coeur d'Alene, all tagged with blessed life. Comments from her friends praised her elegant taste and inspiring lifestyle. It was all a lie, a beautiful facade built on the foundation of my money. Sophia's Facebook timeline told the real, sickening story. There were posts about our beautiful home, featuring the very kitchen I had paid for. There were check-ins at expensive downtown restaurants, dated during the same months I had covered their utility bills. And there, just last week, was a public status update. So excited for our traditional Christmas dinner with family, can't wait to show off our hosting skills. Our hosting skills, our home, our success, the narcissism was breathtaking. But it was Robert who held the key. He had used his reputation as a weapon, so I decided to dissect that reputation piece by piece. His public profile was immaculate: retired First National Bank manager, member of the Spokane Country Club, treasurer of the Inland Northwest Business Leaders Association. A pillar of the community, a man with a lot to lose. But reputations are built on what's visible. I was more interested in what was buried. I went beyond social media, diving into archived news articles, public records, and old courthouse filings. It took 2 days of relentless digging, but I found it. A small, almost forgotten news brief from the late 90s. Robert Jenkins hadn't simply retired, he had been pushed into early retirement. There was a scandal, a dirty real estate deal involving a commercial development that went bankrupt. The bank he managed had issued a high-risk loan, and several small local businesses, carpenters, electricians, plumbers just like my Mateo, had been lost everything. The article was vague, but the court records were not. A civil suit had been filed, alleging that while the bank lost money, Robert Jenkins had personally profited through a shell company that held a piece of the land. The case had been settled out of court, the records sealed, the story quietly buried. He hadn't broken the law, not technically, but he had walked away rich while the little guys, the working men and women of this city, had been ruined. He wasn't just an arrogant snob. He was a predator who preyed on the very kind of people he now looked down on. I leaned back in my desk chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the evidence spread across it. These people had made 3 critical mistakes. They'd underestimated me. They'd gone public with their attack. And they had no idea that their perfect patriarch had skeletons in his closet and that I had just found the key. My laptop became command central, my printer a munitions factory churning out page after page of evidence. I opened a new document and began to type, not a response to their media attack, but something far more potent, a timeline. 5 years of financial support, documented with bank statements, receipts, and canceled checks. I laid them out on my dining room table, a mosaic of my own folly. The down payment for their house, $50,000, drawn from the equity of the home I had shared with Mateo. The kitchen renovation, when David decided granite countertops were essential for resale value, $20,000 spread across 2 high-interest credit cards. 60 monthly mortgage payments of $3,000 each, $180,000 and counting. In total, $250,000, more money than I had spent on myself in the last decade, all poured into their pristine, ungrateful lives. My printer hummed, spitting out the glossy, smiling faces from their social media. There they were, Sophia and David, laughing on a gondola in Venice, a spontaneous anniversary trip that I now realized I had paid for with the money I should have used to fix my leaking roof. There was a leaner showing off a new diamond bracelet, the post tagged best daughter ever. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips, then my hand paused over my own photo albums. I pulled out a small, faded photograph from a simple anniversary trip Mateo, and I had taken years ago to the Oregon coast. We were standing in front of a tiny motel room, huddled together in cheap raincoats, our faces beaming with a genuine, unforced joy that money could never buy. I looked at that photo, at the memory of a life built on love and hard work, and then back at the glossy images of their inherited, subsidized happiness. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about defending the value of a life well lived against one that was simply well funded. I placed Mateo's photo gently to the side, my resolve hardening into something unbreakable. On top of each financial stack, I placed a copy of the newspaper article. My red pen was a scalpel dissecting each lie. Next to Robert's quote about dangerous weather, I wrote one word: fraud. Beside the anonymous claims about my erratic behavior, I wrote, context, see 5 years of financial exploitation. I highlighted the line where Robert was described as a respected banking executive, and in the margin, I simply wrote a question mark and the date of the old news article I had found. 12 identical packets, 12 doses of truth, each one a bombshell designed to detonate their carefully constructed world. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, probably David trying a new angle. I ignored it and kept working. By evening, I had everything organized in 12 thick manila envelopes. I looked at my wall calendar. December 24th was circled in red. It wasn't Christmas Eve, it was Judgment Day. According to Sophia's public Facebook event, a traditional Harrington Christmas dinner, they were hosting 12 people, family, friends, neighbors from their upscale community. The kind of people who read the Spokane Review, the kind of people who deserved to know the truth. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. And tomorrow, Robert Jenkins and his family were going to learn what happens when you declare war on a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. Christmas Eve morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of Spokane winter day that made you grateful for warm houses and family gatherings. Too bad I wouldn't be welcome at either, but I had other plans. I laid out my evidence on the dining room table, not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a lawyer preparing for trial. 12 identical stacks, bank statements organized by year, each monthly $3,000 payment highlighted in a sick, mocking yellow. Receipts arranged chronologically, showcasing the relentless pattern of my support for their lavish lifestyle. Glossy photos printed from their social media. Sophia showing off new jewelry, David posing on a ski trip, Alina and Robert on their veranda, wine glasses in hand. All of it copied 12 times, one for each dinner guest. On top of each stack, I placed the newspaper article. My red pen notes a bloody commentary in the margins. The word lie was scrawled next to Robert's quotes about the dangerous weather. False beside the claims about my erratic behavior. The phrase missing context highlighted the section where they'd conveniently failed to mention 5 years of financial support. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the simple navy blue one I'd worn to Mateo's funeral, pressed and ready for another kind of farewell. Today, I was saying goodbye to the woman who had been a doormat for her family. Tonight, I would be someone who commanded respect. At 6:30 p.m., I loaded my briefcase with the 12 evidence packets and drove to their neighborhood. Their house glowed with a warm, inviting light, expensive cars filling the driveway and lining the manicured street. Through the large front windows, I could see figures moving around the dining room, Sophia playing the perfect hostess in the home my money had kept from foreclosure. I parked across the street and checked my watch, 6:45, perfect timing. Late enough that everyone would be seated for dinner. Early enough that they'd still be on the main course. No easy escape for anyone. The front door was unlocked, of course it was. David loved to boast about how safe their gated community was, how they didn't need to worry about security like people in rougher areas. I let myself in quietly. The warm air, thick with the scent of roast beef and expensive perfume, hit my face, along with the sound of laughter and polite conversation from the dining room. And then Alina's voice, sharp and condescending, cut through the chatter. "But darling," she was saying to one of the guests, "that's simply not how we do things in our family." Our family, after everything they'd done to exclude me from it. That was all the motivation I needed. I walked into the dining room, my briefcase in hand. 12 faces turned toward me, their expressions shifting in a wave from surprise to confusion to outright horror. Sophia froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. David's face went pale. Robert and Alina looked like they'd seen a ghost rise from the grave. "Good evening, everyone," I said calmly, my voice carrying easily through the sudden, dead silence as I set my briefcase on their marble sideboard. "I hope you don't mind me joining your Christmas celebration." Sophia found her voice first, a strangled, furious whisper. "Mother, this is completely inappropriate. You need to leave immediately." "Actually," I said, my fingers clicking open the latches on my briefcase and pulling out the first thick stack of papers. "I think your guests deserve to know who really paid for this dinner, this house, and this lifestyle you've all been admiring." A woman I didn't recognize, dripping in pearls, leaned forward with undisguised curiosity. "What is she talking about, Alina?" David started to rise. She's having some kind of episode, he said quickly. Sophia, call someone. But I was already moving around the table, a silent, avenging angel, placing a packet of documents in front of each guest. Here are the bank records, I said conversationally, my voice cutting cleanly through the stunned silence. 5 years of financial support, $180,000 in mortgage payments alone, plus the down payment, the renovations, the furniture, the appliances, everything you see around you. The room was utterly silent, save for the rustle of 12 packets of paper being opened in unison. I watched their faces, a slow-motion study in dawning horror. I saw eyebrows arch, mouths fall slightly open. A man in an expensive sweater, who I recognized as one of Robert's golf partners, looked from a bank statement to the lavish centerpiece on the table and back again, a flicker of disgust in his eyes. He set his fork down with a soft, final clink. This is, a man I didn't know started, then stopped, his eyes glued to a receipt for their kitchen renovation. Outrageous, finished the woman across from him, who I recognized as Aliner's friend from her Instagram posts. She looked at Sophia, her expression one of utter bewilderment. Sophia, why didn't you tell us any of this? Sophia's perfect composure was cracking, her face pale. It's more complicated than it looks, she stammered. My mother volunteered to help us, we never asked. Actually, I interrupted, pulling the final document from my briefcase. Let's talk about what you did ask for, and what your family told the media about me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I placed copies of the newspaper article on the table, watching as the dinner guests recognized my photo from the unflattering story that had run just days earlier. Now, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sudden, chilling silence, let's talk about the real manipulators in this family. Robert's face had gone from red to ashen. Alina sat rigid in her chair, her wine glass forgotten in her hand. Mr. Jenkins here, I continued, tapping the newspaper, used his old banking connections to plant this story. Notice how I'm portrayed as unstable and dangerous, abandoning poor, elderly people in freezing weather. A gray-haired man in a cashmere sweater, a man who radiated old money and influence, looked up from the article. Robert, he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval, what is this about? The weather was 52 degrees and sunny, I said before Robert could answer. And they weren't stranded tourists. They were David's parents, coming to the Christmas dinner I had been banned from attending because, and I quote, I wasn't good enough for their company. Alina finally found her voice, a strangled protest. That's not, we never said that. You never said what, Alina? I asked calmly. I pulled out my phone, where I'd screenshotted several of David's social media posts. That I was too low class for your family, that my working class conversation would embarrass you in front of your educated friends. The woman in pearls shifted uncomfortably. Elena, surely you didn't. She's twisting everything, Robert blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. This woman has serious mental health issues, the stress of aging, financial problems. Financial problems, I almost laughed. Mr. Jenkins, I've been supporting your daughter and son-in-law to the tune of $3,000 a month for 5 years. The only financial problems here are the ones you're about to have. I paused, letting my eyes sweep over him. Reputations are fragile things, aren't they? Especially for retired bankers with complicated histories. I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He knew that I knew. I turned to address the entire table. These people have taken over $250,000 from me while calling me names behind my back. They've manipulated my daughter against me, banned me from family gatherings, and when I finally stood up for myself, they tried to destroy my reputation in the newspaper. Sophia spoke for the first time, her voice barely a whisper. Mom, I didn't know about the newspaper. Your husband knew, I said quietly, and his parents orchestrated it. They turned me into a villain for refusing to be their personal ATM and chauffeur. The social dynamic in the room was shifting like tectonic plates. The guests were no longer looking at me as the intruder, but at their hosts as the frauds. The woman in pearls fixed her glare on Robert. Robert, how could you let your son take advantage of this woman's generosity and then attack her publicly when she stopped enabling it? It's unconscionable. You don't understand the full situation, Robert began. I understand perfectly, the woman interrupted, her voice like ice. This woman has been funding your family's lifestyle while you treated her like hired help. And when she finally said no, you tried to ruin her. It's despicable. Aliner's voice came out strangled. She abandoned us at the airport. After you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas dinner, I said calmly. After 5 years of paying your bills while you looked down on me for my background. After your son insulted the memory of my late husband. The silence was deafening. 12 people staring at their hosts with expressions ranging from disgust to acute embarrassment for having associated with them. Sophia made one last desperate attempt. Everyone, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. This is a family matter that's gotten out of hand. No, I said firmly, my voice resonating with finality. This stopped being a family matter when you made it public. When you used the newspaper to attack my character, when you decided my reputation was acceptable collateral damage for your pride. I looked around the table at the faces of strangers who now knew exactly who I was. I just wanted you all to know the truth before you read about Anna Flores in the paper again, because you will, but next time it will be the real story. I closed my briefcase and straightened my suit jacket. Enjoy the rest of your dinner, I said, my gaze sweeping over them one last time. It's the last one I'll be paying for. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the eruption beginning behind me, voices raised in accusation, questions demanding answers, the ugly, discordant sound of a carefully constructed social facade crumbling into dust. It was the most beautiful Christmas music I'd ever heard. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by certified mail, its official-looking envelope holding the weight of legal consequences. I signed for it at my front door, noting how the crisp spring air smelled of new growth and possibility, a stark contrast to the winter desperation that had marked those dark December days. Notice of default, the header read in severe block letters. Final demand for payment. Inside, 3 months of missed mortgage payments had finally caught up with Sophia and David, a tsunami of reality crashing down on the shores of their fantasy life. $8,400 in arrears. 14 days to bring the account current or face foreclosure proceedings on the house I had helped them buy. I set the letter aside on my newly purchased coffee table and returned to my morning tea, reading the legal threats the way one might read news about distant weather. Interesting, but no longer my problem. My phone had been a battlefield for weeks. David's number was blocked after the first 2 hysterical, abusive voicemails. Robert and Alina, whose social standing in Spokane had apparently evaporated like morning mist after their Christmas dinner humiliation, had tried calling from unknown numbers, which I'd also learned to ignore. Even Sophia's calls, a barrage of tearful pleas and manipulative texts, had gone unanswered. I had been ignoring them out of a mixture of lingering anger and a cold, clinical curiosity about how long it would take her to swallow her pride and show up in person. The answer, apparently, was 97 days. The proof of their social ruin had come unexpectedly the week before. I was at a local artisan market, treating myself to fresh pasta and a wedge of expensive cheese, small luxuries I was rediscovering, when I overheard 2 women in line behind me. One of them was the elderly woman in pearls from the dinner party. "Did you hear about the Jenkinses?" she was whispering to her friend, completely ostracized. Alina was politely asked to step down from the symphony board, and Robert had to resign as treasurer of the Business Leaders Association. "My dear," the other woman replied, her voice dripping with delicious scandal, "after that Christmas Eve debacle, I'm surprised they haven't sold their house and moved. I heard their own daughter won't even speak to them. A small, private smile touched my lips. The truth, it turned out, was a more effective weapon than any newspaper smear campaign. Sophia knocked on my door that Thursday evening. It wasn't the aggressive pounding of her father-in-law, but a soft, hesitant tapping. She was no longer the confident, polished woman who had excluded me from Christmas. She was someone who looked like she had aged a decade in 3 months. There were dark circles under her eyes, her expensive suit was wrinkled, and the faint, cloying scent of desperation clung to her like cheap perfume. "Mom," she said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I stepped aside and let her in, nodding how she looked around my house as if she were seeing it for the first time. The walls were a fresh, warm white, no longer the tired beige of my grieving years. The new furniture I'd bought with my first 3 mortgage-free paychecks was comfortable and chosen for me, not for someone else's approval. The repairs I'd finally been able to afford now that I wasn't subsidizing another person's American dream. My house was finally my home again. "Nice place," she said quietly, her eyes lingering on a new painting I'd bought from a local artist. "It's what happens when you spend your money on yourself," I replied, settling into my new recliner, instead of on people who don't appreciate it. "Coffee?" I asked, my voice neutral. The offer was a simple courtesy, a gesture to show that I was in control, that this was my space, my terms. She shook her head, perching on the edge of my new couch like a bird afraid to land. "Mom, I need you to know how sorry I am," she began, the words a rehearsed, desperate tumble. "About everything: Christmas dinner, the newspaper article, the way David and his parents, the way we treated you." I settled into my recliner, the soft leather comfort I had earned, and simply said, "Go on." The 2 words were not an invitation for forgiveness, but a command for a full confession. "I didn't know about Robert planting that story," she rushed to say. "I swear I didn't. When I found out, I was horrified." She ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of pure distress. "The things they said about you behind your back, the way they talked about our family, about Dad's memory," her voice broke. My jaw tightened at the mention of Matteo, but I kept my voice level, the calm unwavering. "And what exactly did they say about your father, Sophia?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally looked at me, her gaze a raw wound of shame. "That he was a simple man who knew his place," she whispered. That he understood boundaries in a way you didn't, and I sat there, I didn't say anything." "Yes," I said simply, the word landing with the weight of a judge's gavel. "You should have." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years of her choices filling the space between us. Outside, I could hear my neighbors' kids laughing as they played in their yard, the normal sounds of a normal life. "The house is in foreclosure," Sophia said finally, her voice cracking. "I know," I replied. "We can't make the payments without." She stopped, seeming to finally realize how the words sounded. "Without my help," I finished for her. "Without the $3,000 a month I was sending you, while you let your husband's family treat me like garbage. I know how it looks, Mom, but do you know how much money I sent you over 5 years?" I leaned forward, making sure she was looking at me, forcing her to see the full scope of her entitlement. She nodded miserably. "David and I calculated it after Christmas. The mortgage payments, the down payment, everything else, over $200,000. $237,468. I corrected her, the number precise, a weapon I had sharpened for months. "I know the exact amount because I finally did something I should have done years ago. I added it up." Her face crumpled completely. "Mom, I am so sorry. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it, Sophia," I said, my voice softening, not with pity but with a sad finality. "That money is gone, but more importantly, those years are gone. 5 years when I could have been building a relationship with you, not funding your husband's fantasy life." I know that now," she sobbed. She looked up at me, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. But maybe we could start over. Maybe there's a way to. Are you asking me to resume the mortgage payments? I asked quietly. The hope in her eyes died. We're going to lose everything, Mom, she whispered. The house, David's respect for me, his parents' approval. I don't know what I'll do. You'll figure it out, I said, not unkindly. The same way I figured out how to live without a daughter who respected me. The same way I learned to spend Christmas alone while you celebrated with people who thought I was beneath them. She started to cry then, quiet, broken sobs from a woman who had run out of other people's money and other people's options. I lost you, didn't I? She whispered. I chose them over you, and now I've lost you forever. I watched her for a long moment, this child I had raised, this woman who had let her husband's family convince her that her own mother wasn't good enough. Sophia, I said finally, you didn't lose me, you gave me away, there is a difference. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking small and broken. Is there any chance, she whispered, the words fragile, any way you could forgive me? I looked at her, my daughter, a stranger in my newly reclaimed home, and for the first time I felt a flicker not of anger, but of a deep, weary sadness for the relationship we could have had. I forgave you months ago, Sophia, I said, and I meant it. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of reality. But, I continued, holding up a hand as a flicker of hope returned to her eyes, forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to the way things were. It doesn't mean I pretend this didn't happen. It doesn't mean I resume paying for a lifestyle that came with the condition that I be grateful for scraps of your attention while your husband and his family treat me like I'm less than human. Then what does it mean? She asked, her voice trembling. I stood up and walked to my mantel, where a photo of Matteo, his smile wide and genuine, sat next to a new picture. It was a photo from 2 weeks ago, at my sister Sophia's house for Easter dinner. Me, Sophia, her husband, and their kids, all crowded together on a porch swing, laughing. It was the first holiday I'd spent with people who actually wanted me there, no strings attached. I picked up the frame, my fingers tracing the smiling faces. It means that if you want a relationship with me, you will have to build it from scratch, I said, turning back to her. It means showing me respect, not as an obligation, but because you mean it. It means making choices based on what's right, not what's convenient for David and his parents. I placed the photo back on the mantel, a clear statement of where my loyalties now lay. And it means that the next time someone, your husband, his parents, anyone tries to exclude me or disrespect my husband's memory, you will remember who actually acts like family. She nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time that respect wasn't something you could take for granted. The house, she asked quietly, her last desperate question. It's not your problem anymore. I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. You're a grown woman, Sophia. Figure it out the way grown women do. Get a job that pays enough to cover your bills. Sell the house and buy something you can actually afford. Stop living beyond your means and expecting someone else to subsidize your choices. She stood up slowly, her shoulders straight for the first time since she'd arrived. She looked around my living room one last time, at the life I was building without her. You're right, she said, her voice clear. You're right about all of it. She walked to the door, then turned back, her hand on the knob. Mom, for what it's worth, seeing you stand up for yourself at Christmas dinner. I was embarrassed and angry, but I was also proud of you. Good, I said, offering a small, sad smile. Maybe there's hope for you yet. After she left, I poured myself a glass of the good whiskey and stepped out onto my back porch. Spring was coming to Spokane, the trees beginning to bud, the air warming with promise. In 4 months, I'd be 63. Matteo had been gone for 8 years. I had wasted 5 of those years being a doormat for people who didn't appreciate my sacrifice. I wasn't planning to waste any more. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Sophia. Dinner Sunday, the kids want to show you their school projects. I smiled and typed back, wouldn't miss it for the world. Real family, it turned out, was something you found with people who actually wanted you there. Everything else was just expensive theater, and I was done buying tickets to a show where I wasn't welcome on stage. The whiskey tasted like freedom, and the future looked exactly as bright as I was willing to make it. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.